Hey, Charles.
Morning, John. How you doing?
Okay, how are you?
So far, so good. It's Wednesday.
All right.
It's,
It's Wednesday.
yeah, getting by really quickly. So,
It is.
yeah. So, I sent out a couple of things on Monday. Did everybody get those?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
All right. Wanda, in particular, did you get those?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay. All right. So, so there was a little something in regards to what you had asked about, and so I wanted to give you some kind of response on that. Okay.
I was surprised there were so many women.
Well, yeah, actually, well, you're looking at a period of almost 300 years.
Okay.
So, and so over that 300-year period, yeah, there were, there were quite a few women, and particularly more toward what they would call the higher Renaissance or the later part of the Renaissance. There were quite a few women. In the early part, at least, not a lot that they have a lot of information on. But, the same thing is true with people of African descent, and particularly like in Spain. You don't see a lot of their work, or you don't see a lot of them mentioned really up until about the middle part of the Renaissance, toward the end. And then what you're talking about there is where the Renaissance kind of shifted out of Italy and, began to spread in, along the Mediterranean coast, into Spain and up into like the southern part of France and then across to England. Of course, there were some influences heading north, but, particularly in Spain, there were several artists who, had Moorish ancestry. Okay. And I think in one of the articles that I sent out, one of the things it was talking about was that within the Medici family itself, there was a member of, well, there, one of the members of the family had married a woman who was from, North Africa. And then, of course, their descendants. And so, again, and I think Wanda was asking about that, the fact that, a lot of those African people who went into Europe, a lot of them intermarried into a lot of different families and even into a lot of royal families. So, the race issue at that point in time was almost non-existent. It didn't really matter. It was more set up on class and your your background, as to where you kind of sat in the strata of society. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
because as I read more going into here, there was
I can't hear you very well, Wanda.
There was a section about the Moors ruling.
Yes. Yeah.
Ruling Europe.
Right.
And it talked, and I did a lot of reading. I'm just reading everywhere, and they were in China, Germany,
right,
Rome.
Yeah. Well,
Poland. I mean, it
right.
got pictures and paintings of this, and it was very amazing to see this.
Yeah.
And
well, again, the period of time that you're talking about is what they would call the Byzantine period for Europe, but it was also referred to as the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and the Ottomans, they spread throughout pretty much so most of Central Europe, a good portion of what used to be the Soviet Union, into the Middle East, into Africa, like all, not just North Africa, but all the way down into, say, like about the Congo and middle part of Africa. And that's how, you know, that was one of the first big expansions of Islam, because they were Islamic. Muhammad sort of happened about that period of time. I think he was probably about maybe 300 to 400 years after Christ, you know, somewhere right after that. And the Roman Empire had been expanding, and then when it began to collapse, the Islamic Empire, you know, and through the Ottomans, you know, kind of spread across the world. And of course, that still falls into that period of time that was pre-Renaissance. Okay, and
Were they involved with the Crusades as well?
Pardon?
Were they involved with the Crusades at the time?
Well, the Crusades happened, yeah, the Crusades would have been, again, you know, during that time of the Byzantine period. Okay, it was called the Byzantine period in Europe, and it's you know, and again, you know, because of the expansion into Europe, the Catholic Church was fighting back, you know, because they were losing a lot of ground, you know, to Islam, and so, and then you had the Crusades. In fact, I think you had like four different crusades to the Middle East, and you know, it was, you know, it went back and forth for a very long time. Again, you know, you're talking about several hundred years of history, you know, but again, it's all pre-Renaissance. Okay, it's not during that Renaissance period of time. Now, you know, again, you know, the Renaissance started around about 1300. Is about when they marked the date for the beginning of the Renaissance. And, you know, by that time, you know, you had the expansion of the Ottoman Empire, and then ultimately, you know, the Roman Catholic Church pushed back against them and pushed them out of, you know, out of most of Central Europe and out of like the southern part of Russia. And that's where you get the Russian Orthodox Church and the formation of the Russian Orthodox Church that period of time. You get, you know, and you get this kind of beginning to, again, you know, society began to shift kind of out of this feudal society and became a little more organized. People became a little more mobile, you know, as far as their strata, you know, in society. And you didn't have really just a two-class system of, you know, aristocracy and peasants. You know, you started to get a larger growth in what we call the craft class, artisans, you know, things like that. And then after that, you had this expansion in society to begin to form what we now would call a middle class. And so we're talking about merchants, you know, people who, you know, would be involved in shipping and bringing things back and forth from other parts of the world. And those people became, you know, very wealthy by standards of that day. So that, yeah, that whole period of history it's interesting in the sense that if you begin to look at what was happening from the historical standpoint and look at how art reflects that, you know, you can really see it. You can see it in the change in style, and also the change of how artists portrayed individuals, you know, individual people. So, so this morning, you know, I want to cover a couple of artists out of that period, okay? And there's a couple that you need to know about. And the reason you need to know about them is that without them, you know, the Renaissance may not have gone where it went. So I'm going to open up a couple of, and these are both actually architects, and both of these guys. Oh, okay, yeah. Let's open up this. And then let's open up Brunelleschi. Both of these guys were strongly influential, you know, as far as with other artists and how they affected, you know, art overall. And when we kind of begin to look at these, okay, yeah, we'll start with Gaberte. All right, we'll share that. Okay. All right, can everybody see Lorenzo? Yes? Okay. So this is Lorenzo Gaberte. And by trade, Lorenzo was a goldsmith. You know, he wasn't a painter, but, you know, like most, you know, most artisans or craftsmen, even though he was primarily a goldsmith, he dabbled in a lot of other things, including sculpture, okay? But the other thing that he dabbled in was architecture, okay? And his main competition was the guy we'll talk about next. But what he's known for, more than anything else, are these doors. And these are on the, well, one of the cathedrals in Florence, okay? And I think this is the set of the doors on the back side of the cathedral. And, you know, they're fairly impressive. And by the way, the size of these, they're enormous. You know, they're probably 18 to 20 feet tall. And then here are the front doors. And this looks a little bit blurry on this slide, but and the fact that he was a goldsmith, he made them, you know, in gold. Wow. So so this was not a cheap undertaking, but he ended up putting it on the, what it was, it's the cathedral in Florence, and it's something, Cathedral of the Flowers or something like that. We'll go over it when we talk about Gaberte. And then here's some of the details. Here's, again, you know, a smaller segment of the door. And what do you notice about the figures in this?
They're all the same size.
Yes, they're all the same size. And what else?
A lot of features, a lot of detail in the.
Right. Yeah, they're very lifelike, aren't they?
Yes.
And look at how they move. See, they seem almost flowing and almost fluid, right?
Yes.
And when you looked back at, say, and I think these were done in the early 1300s, I think about 1340, 1350. If you look back, you know, just 50 years before that, at the paintings of Giotto and, you know, a lot of his contemporaries, even though they were beginning to take on some rather lifelike features and fluidity to the forms, they were still stiff in comparison, right? So for a sculptor to achieve you know, the lifelike quality, the movement, you know, out of the human form and animals and things like that, the way that he did was a fairly amazing feat for that period of time. And it definitely got everybody's attention. Okay. And, you know, these are, you know, beautifully designed. And again, you know, they're all stories, you know, out of the Bible because it went on to, you know, a Christian chapel. So it makes sense, you know, that he's going to be telling, you know, biblical stories. Now, the other thing that was really kind of innovative about this was that he actually began to bring the forms off of the surface, and they really did almost take on a three-dimensional feel to them. Before that period of time, even though the figures, if you go back to like the Roman Empire, the Greek empires, you know, things like that, you know, the figures were fairly fluid and lifelike, and they had basically gotten to the point to where they had perfected sculpting to where they could really make something look, you know, three-dimensional. Well, once the world was thrown into more or less the Dark Ages, a lot of that skill went away, and so he basically brought a lot of that back.
Something else I noticed is the perspective of the building itself. It's got very good perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Now he basically is credited with basically coming up with the idea behind what we call linear perspective, and particularly like 1 and 2 point, you know, or 1 point and 2 point perspective. You look at a lot of his drawings and things like that, they all kind of deal with perspective. And yeah, there's a sculpture that he did.
Did he do anything that didn't relate to religion?
Well, no, not really. At the time, you know, the only game in town was the Roman Catholic Church. Okay.
Them damn Catholics.
Well, hey, you know, artists like to eat, right?
Well, you know the old rule, the golden rule. The one that has the gold makes the rules.
That's right.
The Catholics had the gold.
They did, and they were willing to share it with, you know, talented artists to, you know, kind of do, you know, say what they needed to say, right? All right, so we're going to look at this next guy, okay? All right. Now, this is Brunelleschi. Now, Brunelleschi, you gotta love him and you gotta hate him at the same time, okay? Because let me go down just a little bit further here. The reason that Brunelleschi is known historically for any particular reason is that dome right there. So that's the cathedral. It's the Santa Maria del Fiore, okay, and it's in Florence. And this particular church began in the year 290, I think it was 292. All right, that's when they started, you know, building this thing. And so they were building this up until 1300, right? Well, around about, you know, probably like 1320, 1330. Well, probably about 1320. They hadn't completed it. Now, Giotto had actually completed a section of the church, and they had built that and closed it in, and it was functional. But what they didn't have is they didn't have a dome. And, you know, this was this very, very open, expansive space, and it didn't have columns within it. So somebody had to figure out how they were going to, design a dome, that size that would support itself. And there were quite a few architects and designers who submitted ideas for that. None of them were particularly successful, and in fact, I think they had hired 2 other architects before they hired Brunelleschi to try to do this, and both of them ended up, with major disasters. In fact, one architect had gotten fairly close to completing the dome when it collapsed, in on him and all the workers, and killed just about everybody.
Should have hired a structural engineer instead of an architect.
Well, I don't know that they had too many structural engineers at the time. But this was the sort of the layout, for the dome. And then this is a interior plan. So it was rather innovative for its time. And, a lot of those cross pieces and things actually went around, the outside of the dome. They were rings that were built, and then stacked to give it, the strength and support it needed so that it didn't cave in. The end result, let's see, do we have an interior? I don't know that we have an interior shot of that. This is a tiny little thing. Yeah, there's the drawing of sort of the interior, and you can begin to see these ribs and how he would build a section and then put in this, this rib all the way around, to keep the dome stable, stop it from falling in on itself. There's a view from down below looking upward. But this was, this was pretty important stuff. And, there's the top of the dome. That's what they call it. I think they call it the flower. Which is at the very top. And you can go up there and, I think I'd be a little nervous about that myself, but hey. But that's what he's known for is, oh, wait a minute, here we go. No, maybe not. I thought I had some interior views of it. This is another basilica that he engineered and designed. And again,
I will say it's an architectural marvel.
Well, yeah, it's amazing.
They get something to hold up that big for that long.
Right. Well, the thing is, if you look at this, it doesn't look heavy. It doesn't look like there's a lot of weight. In fact, the height, the ceilings, the amount of light, the arches, everything sort of adds to this sort of light atmospheric feel of this building. And if you had ever been into a Gothic church before, most of them were very dark. They had columns really running right down, like 4 or 5 rows of columns, running down there. So it wasn't really open. It was just these rows of columns, and people would have to kind of crowd in around it to see what was going on. And I thought these were a little bigger, but maybe not. But again, that gives you the a bit of a feel for up under, the dome area and how open that feels. that had never been possible before. And so, for the Renaissance, that really began, this whole movement in engineering, design, different sciences. Again, that's another ceiling. And so what you've got there is you've got, basically the constellations. So it's like you're looking at the sky above you. Another dome. And notice that, see, they kept the center open as well as lights, along the side to let light in. And again, that began to create this feeling in these buildings, that you could really almost be in heaven, because of the light and the space. That was something that somebody, in the Middle Ages was not used to, and it was relatively innovative and new, for people in the Renaissance. There's one of the exteriors of the building. Now, all of this was done with stone. And so, it's like, how do you make something made out of stone look light, and fluid and like it could move, right? Not necessarily an easy feat, but he was definitely, probably the key architect of that period of time. Now, the reason that you can love and hate him is that he had a great deal of favor with the Roman Catholic Church at the time. He was their guy. And, when they gave him that assignment to complete the dome on that chapel, and that took about 12 years to do. When he came to that project, and he brought other artists with him. And he had his favorites. Now, one of the young and up-and-coming artists at the time was this guy by the name of Michelangelo. And Brunelleschi was not a big fan of Michelangelo. Michelangelo had gotten the attention of the Pope, and so he saw Michelangelo as a threat. And in fact, later on in life, when Michelangelo got a commission that everybody's fairly familiar with called the Sistine Chapel, the only reason that Michelangelo got that was the fact that Brunelleschi figured he would basically give him an assignment that he was sure to fail at. Because Michelangelo was a sculptor, he did not do frescoes, right? And so he was definitely, giving him an assignment that was not his strong point. And of course, as the story goes, Michelangelo pulled it off. And, it's all history now. So, and after that, Michelangelo pretty much so did what Brunelleschi was afraid of, which was he, at that point, garnered a lot of favor with the Pope. And, he pretty much so, he didn't really ruin Brunelleschi's career, but certainly took a lot of power away from him, a lot of influence. So, after that point, Brunelleschi really didn't do much, that was really innovative or new for the Catholic Church at that point. So, all right. So I wanted to introduce you to those two guys because, again, with the artists that I had sent you, the women artists and all, to research, you should have a pretty good idea of what the early Renaissance was like. And so what we'll do is, not this afternoon, probably next Monday, I'm going to introduce you to about 5 other artists that were working really in the period from about what we would call the early Renaissance into the middle period. And at that point, you'll be introduced to people like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, along with a guy by the name of Frangelico, Donatello, and Masaccio. Okay? So we're looking at somebody's zipper there. I don't know whose that is. Okay. Nice pair of shorts, right? So anyway, we'll look at all of those. This afternoon when we come back, I have artwork from, about 6 or 7 people. And I'm going to be going through that. We'll be talking about the artwork that you submitted. June, I got your piece. Larry, I don't think I've got anything new from you. Oh, wait a minute. No, I do. Okay. John, I've got your 2 watercolors, okay, that you sent me. Ilan, I don't think I have anything new from you. And then Wanda, have you sent me anything? Hello? I don't know. Yeah.
I'm still working on that horse.
Are you still working on this? Okay, yeah. But anyway, the idea is if you haven't sent me something, then go ahead and send something in, all right? And get it to me and I'll be happy to talk about it this afternoon. And so we'll spend this afternoon talking about the artwork you guys submitted. And then Friday we'll be talking about drawing all day. And then Monday we'll come back and we'll kind of jump into the middle Renaissance, okay? Sound like a plan?
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds like a plan.
Pardon?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. All right. So I've got like 7 minutes. So I'm going to open up some of the work that some of you guys sent. And we'll start talking about a little bit of it. And then we'll come back to it this afternoon, since we have the time. Okay. Now this piece,
Nice.
this was sent in by Bob. Bob joined us last, I think, well, actually this week. Okay. And so he's kind of new to the classes. Bob, are you online?
I am.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about this. What did you do? How did you do it?
This is called Scratchboard. And I added a little ink to it, but not much. And basically it is a hood ornament from, I think, an early Packard, maybe in the 30s. There was an awful lot of stuff done for aftermarket hood ornaments, and there was really some beautiful artwork out there. So this is a Scratchboard, and I don't know if you know about Scratchboarding, but it's gaining popularity a lot.
Well, what I know about Scratchboard is that Scratchboard's been around for a long time.
Yes.
Really since about the 1920s. And, people like Leindecker, who were illustrators, used Scratchboard illustrations. They were real popular with publishers, particularly like magazine publishers and folks like that. And they were kind of considered, a quick method, and, that's relative. Okay.
Yeah, really, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because quick quick for a publisher at that point in time, would have been, 3 to 5 months. Where if they had given an assignment to somebody like N.C. Wyeth, who was doing an oil painting, he would have probably started about a year out, from when they were going to go to publication date. But, they would hire illustrators to do, these black and white illustrations. Again, relatively, they were quick pieces of art, versus, something that was painted or, other different forms. Now, when you say Scratchboard, describe that for people. What,
Well, Scratchboard is basically a piece of something like material, hardboard material, and then what they coat it with a really fine clay, and they cover that whole board with clay, and then they cover that with a black ink. And then as you work on it, you can you scratch it out.
Richard said go where?
Talk right.
Top right or what?
Anyway, that's that's
So-
pretty much how it's done. It's masonite, what they use now as
Right.
the baseboard. But you can get something called clayboard, which doesn't have ink on it. And I've done a couple of clay boards also, which are all ink. And I'm going to try using some acrylic paint on one of my clay boards to see how that works.
So you're going to use that as like the coating for a color, and then you're going to cut through it?
Yeah, depending whatever the subject might be, it might, if it requires like an animal with hair or something or other, you might want to use the scratching technique to create that depth of hair or fur.
How thick is that board?
How thick is it?
Yeah.
I would say it's probably maybe 3/8, maybe.
Look, I was wondering how heavy it is if it's clay.
Oh, it's very light. It really is very light. This
Yeah.
particular thing, I think, is a 9x12 piece that this is. But yeah,
you couldn't really want
light.
to drop that, would you? Would it break if you dropped it?
No, I don't think so. It's pretty strong, really. Surprising.
Okay.
You can beat them up
Where can
pretty.
you get these scrapboards?
Where?
Yes, where can
Dick
you get
Blick
it?
is where I buy it. The one that's the best brand right now is what's called Ampersand, and it's they're not real expensive. They're something like a 9x10 or let's say an 8x10 would be probably $5, maybe $6, something like that.
Yeah, they're about in cost. They're about equivalent to buying, a canvas. Now,
Right, yes.
The thing with Scratchboard is you can use a lot of different tools, but they do have like these pinpoints or nibs that you can get specifically for Scratchboard that you just put into like a calligraphy pen, and you just hold it, and you can cut through the ink fairly easily on that stuff.
Yeah.
You can also use like an X-Acto knife, any kind of like a nail, if it's real sharp. Obviously, the cruder the tool, the less refined the lines are going to be. So the finer you can get the lines, the more detail you can get in. But for working like, really broad areas like this, using, you can outline it and scratch back away from it a little bit, and then use like a razor blade and or use an X-Acto knife just to scrape out, the bulk of the area to take it down to the white. So
The biggest challenge that I have discovered is creating halftones and values, because if you like one I'm working on a snowy owl, and there's an awful lot of changing of values in order to try to create depth in the image.
Yeah. Now, are you using like a pin handle and those nibs?